story by the Intercept that years ago, during the Clinton administration, right after I think it was the 96 midterm elections, where Newt Gingrich got in, there was a bill that was up about that included a rule, a pricing clause in the well, I guess this was a longstanding rule called the reasonable pricing rule. Bernie Sanders offered an amendment after the Clinton administration basically changed the rule. The reasonable pricing rule essentially said that if you had a drug that was developed with public money, you would have to sell that drug at a reasonable price. I don't know what the mechanism was in which they determined what the reasonable price is. Maybe it was like a certain percentage over what it cost to manufacture it and market it, whatever it was. But there was a price cap on it. And this was just a function of a drug that was developed by the American government. And the Clinton administration took it out. A House member from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, offered an amendment to reinstate the rule. I don't know what the bill was that they were passing. And it failed largely on a party line vote, 242 to 180. In 2000, Sanders authored and passed a bipartisan amendment in the House to reimpose the reasonable pricing rule. In the Senate, a similar measure was pushed by the late Paul Wellstone of Minnesota. Then a senator in the Senate voted to table that amendment. And that senator was Joe Biden. Here is Bernie Sanders. And
see the names of all the people.
Yeah, who voted with Joe Biden.
McConnell, Sessions, people like that.
Well, I mean, just go through it. There's John Breaux from Louisiana was another Democrat who joined him. Louisiana, very, very, conservative state. Chris Dodd from Connecticut, who went on to protect the motion pictures industry in their so-called intellectual property. You had a couple other, Joe Lieberman, of course, ultimately was kicked out of the Democratic Party. Torricelli from New Jersey, a lot of pharmaceuticals. That was basically it. There was one or two others from New Jersey. Lautenberg, and then from Landry. So basically, people doing the pharmaceutical business. And Joe Biden was one of those guys. That would prevent a company like Gilead Sciences from price gouging when they're working with drugs that have been developed by the U.S. government. The Antiviral Drug Discovery and Development Center at the University of Alabama in 2019 received a 5-year, $37.5 million grant from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, one of the 27 institutes that make up the National Institute of Health in this country. Those drugs are the basis of any type of COVID-19 drug that might be found. We have no way of controlling the price of that. So we're just going to have to subsidize this company for subsidizing them to create the drug in the first place. Here's Bernie Sanders back in the day, 2000, calling for the reinstitution of this reasonable price provision.
The reality is, and the New York Times in a front page story made this point, that much of the drug research in this country comes from taxpayer support. Our amendment requires that the NIH abide by current law and ensure that a company that receives federally owned research or a federally owned drug provide that product to the American public on reasonable terms. This is not a new issue. During the Bush administration, the NIH insisted that cooperative research agreements contain, quote, a reasonable price clause, end quote, that would protect consumers from exorbitant prices of products developed from federally funded research. The NIH several years ago abandoned the clause under heavy pressure from the pharmaceutical industry. While a reasonable pricing clause is not the only device that will protect the investment that American taxpayers have made in numerous profitable drugs, this amendment makes clear that Congress will not stand by while NIH turns over valuable research without some evaluation that the price charged to consumers will be reasonable as is required by current law. I reserve the balance of my time.
That same company, Gilead, who was in that clip, the CEO was in the clip with Trump talking about developing the coronavirus, was sued by the Trump administration. The lawsuit accused the company of profiting for billions of dollars off of taxpayer research without paying any royalties. So never mind the reasonable price clause. They didn't even provide the royalties to the government for developing it. The company, according to the government, infringed upon patents owned by the Department of Health and Human Services and had refused attempts by the department to license its patents and collect royalties. The company sells two drugs, Truvada and Descovy, that can be taken once daily to prevent HIV infection. Gilead makes more than $3 billion a year on Truvada. In Africa, Truvada costs about $60 per patient per year. Gilead has sued companies that have tried to bring generic versions to the United States, keeping them out of the market after secret settlements. Unbelievable.